Yellow Tape Podcast. Kevin Duhart excited about this conversations that we'll be having, a series of conversations between the thin line of Christ and culture, right? I'm a Christian, unapologetic about that. And so, having conversations that are centered around what's happening in popular culture, what's happening in the world events, even, right? Because I think oftentimes we don't spend enough time talking about stuff that impacts the world and how that impacts us, right? And then what is the Christ centered mindset toward that? How would Christ see that based on the word, but then also what we know of the Holy Spirit, right? And yeah, so welcome to Yellow Tape. My first time doing this, I'm a little bit nervous, just about to jump in my bag in this thing, so it should be a lot of fun. But I got a few of the crew with us today. A few of the people that are helping me do this right here. Uh, Mrs. Wangel, Mrs. Show, Mrs. Kim, and Mr. Brandon. So I'm excited about having them in. Clamp it up. All right, let's chop it up a little bit. And yeah, I know you got a few questions for me, so For those that, well, none of y'all know, I actually like a show on YouTube called Pop the Balloon for Love, but it's a specific one by a young lady named Arlette and her husband, BM. I love watching this show. I don't have a specific one. All of them are my favorites. Every single show, I learn something new about pop culture, millennial culture. 'Cause I'm not a millennial. I am a proud baby Xer. I ain't from that generation. I'm just kidding. I love y'all, but I'm not a millennial. But I learned a whole lot about the young millennial conversations, how they speak. Y'all are really big into energies and stuff like that, and vibes. But anyway, I love to pop the balloon. The pop the balloon show is amazing. I like to see people walk out and not to get their feelings hurt, but to figure out what you like about people and the brutal honesty about what you dislike about a person. Uh, it just makes me laugh. I'm so glad I'm out in the game. My goodness. But all of them are my favorite episodes. Every single one of them. I wait every Wednesday for Arlette and her husband to drop a brand new show. It's like watching In the Heat of the Night or something, or I just love it. So we're about two seasons in, and they just started the third series, and it's already amazing. So there's a Christian one too. There's a Christian Pop the Balloon. I didn't know that. Do they do about energies and all that stuff? Do they talk about energies and vibes? I did see one particular Pop the Balloon recently, where the gentleman was a Christian. He was for real. And he wanted to make sure that all of the ladies were believers too. So one girl was a believer, but she wasn't. She said, I'm really going back into the faith. I kind of fell off, but I'm coming back. So I guess, I don't know if he had time for the redemptive power of God to work in her life, because he popped his balloon and said, "No, you're not where I need you to be." So she confessed, she believes, she goes to church, but I guess he didn't have time for the redemptive power to change her to catch up to where he was. So he popped his balloon, and she was a very pretty girl. And I was like, bruh, like, what does that say about Christianity? He's like, yeah, you're just not where I need you to be in Christ. Grow her. No, I don't know. I did laugh, but I saw it coming because he kept asking questions like, so, like, how long you been walking with God? Like, like maybe he's a pastor or a youth pastor, or he wants to be a pastor. And he's like, I don't have time for you to just be catching up to God. I need you to already be where I'm at in God. I think people take that whole um unequally yoked thing to, we don't see Christ the same way I see Christ, but that's not what that scripture's talking about in context. I think it's in Second Corinthians, but it's actually talking about believers and non-believers. Like, how can an unbeliever and a non-believer walk together? That's unequally yoked. Or, how can Christ and Baal be in the same? So it's like not talking about, I'm more, solid with Jesus than you are. We're just not gonna work. I don't know if that's not what that text is talking about in context. But hey, to each his own, man. If you want to pop your balloon because Because right now, when it comes to the ratio of men, specifically black men and black women, he actually could pop his balloon and find he might find what he's looking for, unless he's looking for energies. So that's a whole slug, right? Y'all better leave them energies alone. It's too much energy in this generation. I love Pop the Balloon for Love, but you guys send me the Christian version. Is the host like a Christian too? It was in a salon. The Christian version? Really? B, you gotta send me the Christian one. I didn't know that was a real Christian one. I know about Arlette. She's a Christian though. Arlette and her husband, they're Christians. So they had gospel music as the intro. So, like, are they dressing provocative? Your doili's too short for me. Can you imagine? I can see your ankles. Like, so what is your idea of a perfect date? Yeah, you feel me? I feel like, we roll up to prayer. After that, I feel like, some communion. You feel me? Y'all said you I have single men and women in the church, but going back to church the next week might be weird. They didn't pop brother so and so's balloon. Brother Tommy's balloon got popped as soon as he walked out. Hey, why y'all pop Bobby's balloon? Mm-mm. It's giving. All right. So I want to talk about the separation of church and state, though, because we heard that so much. At least I did. I don't know about y'all, but I heard that from a lot of people that we need to separate church and state, and Christians should not be participating in Christians. We're not a Christian nation, and I will be honest and say this, and I know some leaders, pastors may get upset, but the truth of the matter is, America is not a Christian nation in the context of what it will look like to be a Christian nation. If it's a Christian nation, there are certain things that wouldn't have happened in this nation, certain gross ills done to certain people. If we start from the beginning, and again, history is my thing, right? So, America was founded in thievery. You know, I love this nation. Don't get it twisted. This is my country. I love this country. I think it's the best country in the world to start a family in, to live, to exceed, to excel. I believe that you can have an American dream if you work hard. I do believe that, regardless of where you come from. If given the right tools, you can do something effective that can be legacy building. I'm gonna say that's true now. I don't think it was always true. The country was started by those who stole it. Thieves came over here. Thieves were sent. Criminals were sent, and they established this country. Um, Took it from the natives. It's just what it is, and brought people of color, blacks specifically, and armed them, and then made them do their bidding. Had them build this country. As Angela Rice said, they built this joint for free. Our ancestors built it for free. This is the facts. And so when I look at church separation of church and state, you know, I had to go back in time to kind of figure out, okay, historically speaking, uh, what does this make sense? And Pastor Show is doing something that made noises while I was talking. And go on mute. We're recording a podcast. um, but anyway, all seriously, going back to the separation of church and state, this is something that happened not to keep the church out of the state, but to keep the state out of the church. Because initially, in the substratum of this argument, was about the state taking over the church like it did in England. And so they were saying, hey, we come over here, we don't want that same thing over here. So they decided we'll put laws in place that keeps the state out of the church affairs. And I think it was Thomas Jefferson, ironically, a slave owner who had children with his slaves, it would be Thomas Jefferson who actually would pen. And I think he called the state, which he represented, the world. I think there's a phrase, I have it somewhere where he said it. Hold on a second, let me pull it up. He said something I thought was very key in reference to church and state that I think you should know. And he said, shucks, I can't find it. But anyway, he was talking about if the state, if the world becomes an agency of the state, I'm sorry, if the church becomes an agency of the state, it becomes like an agency of the world. And he basically said we need to keep the world out of the church. And so that thought was, we'll separate the two. That way we don't have to deal with that. It didn't mean that the church couldn't participate in politics. The church couldn't have a voice or shouldn't have a seat at the table. It meant that the state could not dictate what the church would do. That's what that meant. That was the initial of that. Mhm. They do. They do. The Mormon church is really solid with that. Yeah. They don't let, yeah. But even the Catholic church, same way. The Catholic church is considered sovereign. It's a corporal soul. Like in most churches in America, not all, but most churches in America, we apply for the tax exempt status, the 501c3, which makes you actually, government speaking, an agency of the state. You actually become a part of the state because heretofore, at least prior to President Trump's first term as president, they had the Lyndon Baines Johnson Act that was passed back in the days of LBJ, which put things in place that allowed the preacher, well, restricted the preacher or whatever leader of a nonprofit to say certain things against the state. Because if you did, they would take away your 501c3 status, which means you had to pay taxes. So in order for churches not to pay taxes, uh, they passed that bill where you can get government funds for programs and resources, not just for buildings and not just to pay pastors. And no, you can apply for certain grants or whatnot, um, that allowed you to be that were tax exempt. Taxes were taken out of it, which allowed you to do the work of ministry in your community. So you became an agency of state. So you want to start a school, a program that help people reform from prison. You want to start a program, feeding program or a food program for those who are food insecure in community. You could do that with government funds. But going back to it with the church and state, that was the initial thought. The initial thought was we want to make sure that the state does not encroach upon the church. That was it. Somehow it got twisted over time that you guys got to keep your voices out of politics. And I think that's a gross way of seeing it as a believer too. I was surprised by the amounts of believers this last election cycle, just recently, that were advocating for some of the things that we as believers just do not believe. I was really, really taken aback because the truth of the matter is, if you're going to ask me to participate, then you're asking me to give speech to and voice to our convictions. I was surprised by how many convictions that we don't share. I was surprised by how split we were on biblical convictions. And even still to this day, while I'm sitting here, I even have tensions with my own. There's because, and this one I'm gonna get in trouble here, but hey, it's yellow tape, right? With the whole evangelical community, there are things that they believe uh, that we share, but then then there are things that you share that I don't necessarily share with you, or maybe I used to subscribe to that until I kind of matured and really started working with people and realized that Christianity is not, it's not all nuanced the same. Um, there are convictions that we should share that's at the substratum, or should I say, that are core to our belief systems. But I also realize that there are Christians that don't always share in some of these particulars, right? That we should agree on the concrete 101s, the foundational stuff, but then we may differ on a few other things, right? For instance, like women in ministry, like people disagree on that. I believe that if she's qualified, let the woman preach, let her minister, let her lead. I mean, why not? Right? We even got proof of that when, if you consider scripture in the book of Acts, um, some of the women that were part of helping establish the church at Rome. I mean, they were there. So why act like they weren't? But then there's certain things that we should fully, fully, fully agree on. And I was surprised by the amounts of believers that were advocating for things that we don't believe. It still boggles my mind a little bit. Not in a judgmental way. I was just taken aback, surprised by it. So with that separation of church and state, I saw many trying to tell believers that you shouldn't participate, or if you do, you need to think in this way because you're not trying to force the world to be Christians. And I don't believe that our job is to legalize, well, I shouldn't say legalize, but legislate America into Christianity. Does that make sense? You can't turn the world into Christians by laws. That doesn't make you a Christian. As a matter of fact, it's the antithesis of everything Christ did. He didn't come to abolish the law, but he came to fulfill the law because we couldn't do it, right? And so through that lens, I think he desires relationships with each man, each woman, each person. But I think legislating or purposely legislating laws with the hopes that people are now being obedient to this Christ or being obedient to this God, I feel that's far reaching, right? Especially in America, which is a democracy. Now, if we lived in a theocracy, I would understand that, but we don't. If we lived in a monarchy, I might even understand it, but we don't. We live in a democracy. We are a nation of laws, but we are a nation of beliefs. We are nations of cultures. We are a nation of expressions that all differ. I think that perhaps maybe part of part of this nation's white Western Euro evangelistic culture, which was given to us initially, may have had certain pure points to it, maybe, but over time, I think it just got jumbled up with um, with this desire and this thirst to uh, to dominate in culture and to make everybody believers by Christians being atop of every mountain and then forcing the world to see, or forcing our nation and every system in our nation to see Christianity as the pliable choice because we are making the world Christian without evangelizing the heart. If you can't legislate the heart, you have to you have to evangelize it with the good news. But the good news doesn't feel like the good news if all we do is legislate laws without revelation. And so, but at the same time, here's the dichotomy, here's the tension, right? As a Christian, you're asking me to participate, but I can't vote by interest. That's part of my job. I'm a believer. We vote our interest. That's our voice. So if you're going to ask me to come to the table, then I got to come to the table with our convictions, what that looks like. But that's not a separation of church and state. We're not all Christian. But if I'm supposed to participate, I can't vote in the interest of things that are antithetical to what I believe or what I'm taught, right? That's always going to be the tension point for believers. So I think we have to start raising up, especially in the Christian world. I think it would be important for leaders, churches, pastors, parachurches, whatever, to identify and raise up people within your belief system that will run for office, who are broad enough to encompass not just the convictions of what we believe as Christians, but also understanding the suffering, the marginalization, the disenfranchisement of people in the communities of which we live as Christians. Does that make sense? And in developing relationship and language for them, where we can advocate for those who are oppressed, but at the same time, we can advocate for what we believe as well. And I think, and letting the church do the work of evangelizing souls, and letting the state um, presenting individuals from within our context that will represent us in the state. Does that make sense? Yeah. 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 I said a whole lot, I guess, just kind of rambling into my thoughts because you're making too much noise. Um, it's like going on. But the separation of church and state, I think, is a big deal. Even going back to evangelicalism and the thought of in the 19, and this is a nerd moment, how in the 1960s, uh, Christianity began to get courted big time by politicians. But it's the 70s where it really took off because you had the interests of the Jerry Falwells, the Pat Robesons, we know later from the, what is it, not 227 Club, what is the thing, the 700 Club. I never understood why it was called 700. Yeah, that might be a Wikipedia or something. Why was it called the 700 Club? For years I've never looked it up. I just wondered. But I remember seeing him on TV as a kid. Then you had the interest of Jim Baker and Tammy Faye Baker. I remember watching them as kids on TV. My parents, I grew up in a Christian household, so we watched PTO. I remember them come up there singing. And I remember when BB and CC made their debut on there. Lord, lift us up where we belong. Everybody's clapping. Looking at these two little black singers. And I love CC and BB. They amazing. PTL was Jim and Tammy Baker. Jim and Tammy Faye, that's her name. Jim and Tammy Faye Baker. And then you had Pat Robeson and the Jerry Falwell. I think it was called The Moral Majority. He's actually the founder of Liberty University, which is a very respectful school, very respected school. But anyway, that time frame, they all were courted by politicians. And the one that really took notice and advantage of that opportunity was actually President Reagan. And President Reagan went to the most racist county in the South. 1980, when he announced his presidential bid, it was 7980. He went to the most racist county in the South, the last county, I believe, to segregate, something like that. And that's where he announced his bid for presidency. Now, that's a clarion call to certain types of people. And you know what his campaign slogan was? Make America Great. That was the campaign slogan. Good old Ron Reagan. And this is before Just Say No to Drugs by his wife, Nancy Reagan. But he went there and he courted the church. The state was coming to dance with the church. And the evangelical community, at that point, the interest that Jerry Falwell was putting forth against drugs, against crime and things of that nature, and the interests of those that were a part of that whole circle connected with Ron Reagan and the Republican Party. And that began the public dance, and I would say the covenant between the Christian evangelical community and the right-wing community. I'm not saying it's all bad. I believe that we should have a voice and a seat at the table in any administration, but that's where that began, literally. Well, that's where that really went to the next level. It skyrocketed at that place. It began in the 60s and 70s, around the whole Dixie Crack movement. And anyway, all of that. Jimmy Carter was a Christian. President Jimmy Carter, Christian. I think he taught Sunday school, but he was on the left. Ronald Reagan came in, was on the right, and he won. And they courted the Christian community. And it's been that way since. So if you ever want to know when did that start, you can say, you can stick your chest out and say, man, it started in the 60s and 70s, but it really became a thing in 1980. And Ronald Reagan went on to win the presidency of the United States of America. Yep, he became that president. And but there wasn't a separation of church and state then. They went and grabbed the church and brought us into it. And here's the thing, most of the time when you hear that kind of verbiage, you only hear from the left side of politics. Those who are a little bit more liberal, not a little bit more, especially this last election, a lot more liberal than, than, yeah, man. I was looking at something today, Jelly, where the governor, no, the lead, what is the lead one of the lead, not legislators, but the school board president or something like that. Maybe the Department of Education. I don't know, but in Oklahoma, I can't think of the guy's name. You have that information? Yeah, I know you could pull it up. But they mandated that you teach the Bible in Oklahoma. And I don't know how how you say it, Oklahomians. I don't know how Oklahomians feel. Probably in Tulsa, they might feel great about it. And maybe even in OKC. I don't know how Oklahomians feel about that as a whole, but I'm sure there's people that are not Christian that may feel a way about that. I don't know what to think about that. It's like, as a believer, it's like, oh, wow. But then what part of Christianity are we teaching and what part of the Bible are we teaching and how are we teaching it? Yeah, who's teaching it? Who's qualified to teach it? Is it a theologian? Is it a historian? Or is it the gym teacher who this is yeah, like who's teaching it? Is it a upset? Is it a pissed off believer? Is it a former, like a reformed agnostic? Who's teaching it? The superintendent of Oklahoma. So it's for the whole state, right? Yeah. And it's K through 5 or is it all the way to 12? K through 12. Take it back. As Sonny Holston would say on The View, this is the legal note. Ages, you said 5 through 12? So grades 5, 5th grade to 12th grade, you got to learn the text. You got to learn the Bible. You must incorporate the Bible in lesson plan. Wow. You got to. Hmm. 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 Yeah. 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 Yeah, it is. So the Bible, the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, and the Ten Commandments. I know in Louisiana, their governor uh, just okayed. I think it was the governor. I don't know, but they just passed a law this summer in Louisiana where the Ten Commandments will be in the classrooms there. At least they voted for it to happen. I don't know if it's going to happen or not, but I think it is. I can fact check that myself, but the Ten Commandments will be in the classrooms in Louisiana. And then I know the governor here in Texas, Governor Abbott, they made it optional that the Bible could be taught for any school that brings the Bible or the Bible into their curriculum. They're going to pay for it. So there's a monetary benefit to actually bringing the Word of God to the classrooms. Whoo, it's approved. It starts in 2025. So kids come back to school with "Thou shalt have no other God before me." As a believer, it's like, whoa, that's actually kind of. Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, we've definitely evolved from that. Yeah, yeah, yeah. When our parents were kids, they definitely prayed at school. I know my parents told me they definitely prayed at school because I think Madeline O'Hare was her name. She's the one that sued to have prayer taken out of her son's school. I think they were in Washington and Seattle or something like that. But they sued the state to have prayer taken out. Then it became a windfall of that around the nation. But prayer never left school. I think that's one of the things I think when I was a youth pastor, because I spent some time as a youth pastor, we never, I never relied on the teachers to pray for our kids. I told our kids to go to the flagpole and pray. So it was like the students could always pray. That never was taken out of school. The students can always pray. So it was more like an indictment that the kids stopped praying because maybe parents stopped praying with their kids. But my thought was, hey, y'all go to the flagpole and start prayer. And so some of my students went to the flagpoles at their schools every morning and pray, and before they knew it, the principals, the faculty, they were coming out to pray with the kids. So it was taken out as far as being led by the teacher, but it was never taken out of school if the kids did it. I think it was more of an eye opener that perhaps maybe people weren't really teaching their kids how to be bold in their stance for Christ. It exposed, I think, if anything, and that's one way of looking at it. I wasn't around that time, but that's one way of looking at it. I do think the Ten Commandments were up in certain classrooms. Absolutely. Yeah. But our country has so many people that don't believe the way we believe now. Yeah.